Good morning, everyone. It's always fantastic to be here in Banff. It's like a paradise, is it not, for musicians? Have you all had a great week? I hope so. I've had an amazing week, met lots of colleagues, met some new people, obviously the young people, many of whom I did not know. It's really a discovery. It's fantastic. So when Barry asked me to do this, he kind of gave me free rein. The other day I met someone who asked me, what does Piatigorsky have to do with this string quartet competition? And I thought for a moment, and to myself, I said, everything. But I didn't say that to the person who told me that. And I invited this person to attend the lecture and hope that I will address some issues that have to do with the competition and, more importantly, have to do with life, with all of you. So, without delay, let's begin. I know we all share a tremendous love of music and appreciate its incredible impact on our lives. It's unique and it's irreplaceable, and that's why you're all here. As I reflect on my own 74 years of existence, there's one experience that changed my life and my outlook on life on the cello, and everything really I have done since. Gregor Piatigorsky is one of the most exceptional artists to have ever graced the stage. His life story reads like an adventure story. In fact, his autobiography, any of you read Cellist, the autobiography of Piatigorsky? Oh, fantastic. So you know that it's kind of like an adventure story. His qualities as an artist and as a humanist exemplify how the language of music speaks directly to our hearts and uplifts our souls. And it also inspires us to appreciate the beauty of life. Piatigorsky was my teacher and my mentor for nearly 5 years. I became his assistant in the last year and had the privilege of sharing some very personal and meaningful experiences with him. As you all know, and perhaps you have all had the experience of having a great teacher in your life that has an impact on you that lasts for a lifetime. And for me, that man and that teacher was Piatigorsky. He's not only an artist of legendary proportions, he left a legacy that remains vibrant, purposeful, and meaningful to this day. And today, I hope to offer you an intimate and very personal insight into this man and the man behind the artist, a man whose passion and empathy and wisdom and artistry left an indelible mark on the world of music. I put this together through a lot of research, rare recordings from KUSC NPR, retrospectives, clips from documentaries and films, Zoom interviews I did with 7 of my colleagues from the class who are still with us, photos, rare footage, some of which you have never seen, of performances and masterclasses, and I hope and believe I've put together and woven together a truly extraordinary portrait of this human being. We will also listen to him share with us in his own words what mattered most to him, what motivated him as an artist and a teacher, and why the cello became his voice. Let's begin with Piatigorsky speaking about choosing music as a profession.
Nobody can really choose music as profession like you can choose to become a dentist or whatever. It chooses you. So actually, from the beginning, you have a very little to say. You're taken by it. There is the cello, that wooden box with 4 strings. Yes, it was made by a genius, but still, it is a wooden box. And it is amazing how wide, all-encompassing is that thing that does not leave time practically for anything else. And so that is constant, never-ending striving for something is almost unachievable. The reason for that feeling is that if, as a performer, you perform great music, but you can never perform it well enough, the music remains above you. You're just striving to reach it. And the better you become at it, the music moves higher, so it becomes unreachable. You have to give all your life, only to discover that it's not enough. But you have to live thousands of years, maybe to know, and I don't know half of the possibility.
That was Piatigorsky's house and home estate, which was quite remarkable. The circumstances, however, of childhood years of Piatigorsky, his adolescence, were severe. They were filled with struggles brought on by deprivation, by poverty, and by discrimination. At the age of 8, because his family was so poor, he was forced to supplement his family's income by playing in theaters, of course, silent movies, and accompanying them, which was a kind of improvisation. This said, he also had remarkable luck.
Even when the kind of a love scene, that I knew very little about, I had to find something romantic, sweet to play. He gave to me that job I would never know. I was about 8. I was not a child prodigy. I was a worker. And I never stopped working since.
As a young boy, he was told that he had no talent and should choose another profession. True story. Yet his attraction to the cello really overpowered him, and he could not resist it.
During the summer season, I played for a cellist from a visiting orchestra.
So I was just a kid. And my father sent me to play for King Kulkin. And after I have played, he told me, now, go home and tell your father to forget about the cello because you have no talent whatsoever and you're young enough to choose some other things to study. I couldn't be happier because finally I could play with other boys, football, and could run around, and the cello was always in my way because I had to practice. So I was very relieved, I was very happy, and the cello stood just in the corner. But each time I passed that corner, I saw that the cello, I could not resist to touch it, and I could not resist playing it. And so I do ever since.
When Piatigorsky was only 15 years old, he auditioned and remarkably won the solo cello seat in the Bolshoi Theater Orchestra. 15. Now, that orchestra was the greatest orchestra in Russia at the time, and the Bolshoi was the most respected ensemble in the country. Now, the great singer Fyodor Shalyapin was the star at the Bolshoi Theater at the time. And at 15, Piatigorsky realized that he still needed to grow and develop and learn as a young man and also, of course, as a cellist. And since he had no cello teacher, he decided to turn to Shalyapin to have a lesson. So it was organized that he would go to Shalyapin's house and meet with him and play for him. And so it happened. The housekeeper opened the door. He arrived, escorted Piatigorsky into a room, and there sat this gentleman, 6'5", about 300 pounds, with a white hat and a white suit. He described this to me quite vividly. And he motioned to Piatigorsky and said, "Сидите, пожалуйста." Please sit down. Sat down, play. Started to play. First piece, nothing happened. Second piece. Finally, by the third piece, he played everything that he had prepared. And this huge guy came up to Piatigorsky, great singer, right? Amazing singer. put his arm around the young man and said, "My boy, you sing too much when you play. Speak more." Now that was a lesson, of course, because what we try to do when we play is speak, not just sing. So that was one of the amazing stories that he shared with me and a lot of other people that got us all thinking differently. Despite Piatigorsky's early success, and because of the few opportunities for growth and development he had in Moscow, he tried to get out. And so he escaped the tyranny and persecution of Bolshevik Russia and fled to Germany.
I left for Germany and eventually began my studies with the Julius Klengel in Leipzig.
Julius Klengel, who taught at the beginning of the 20th century in Leipzig and had a world-famous class, he was very much a teacher who believed in pitting students against each other in a positive way. I think this idea of students learning from each other and feeling that they were all in the work at the same time was very much a Klengel byproduct.
Professor Klengel was really a wonderful man, as nice as one can be. Because he was so nice, he was very successful as a teacher. Somehow we asked him to play, so he wrote a berceuse, He was a very, very, very sweet old man. And so he says, well, I will play maybe without accompaniment. And that was really, really tough on us to be serious, because he was old with a beer, stained, with his cigar. He always have a tiny cigar. And that berceuse, he wrote, and he played, I don't know if I will be able to copy him, but he has a very fast vibrato, and he played. So it went on.
If you saw a guy in a red shirt sitting in the corner, that was me. At 21, Piatigorsky joined the venerable Berlin Philharmonic as its solo cellist under the legendary Furtwängler. His life as solo cellist of the Berlin Philharmonic was wonderful for a while. However, his responsibilities, as anybody who's ever played an orchestra knows, were overwhelming. They became too great for him. And he began to realize that he could never be a soloist by remaining in the orchestra. So he left after a few years. And he decided to move to North America. The timing of his arrival in New York Harbor could not have been worse. The day after he arrived, the Great Depression struck, and the whole country was thrown into turmoil. Most people's lives were wiped out financially. However, he had good luck, and he also had extraordinary talent. Upon hearing him play, one of the great impresarios at the time, Arthur Judson of Columbia Artists, immediately offered him a tour, community concerts they were called, across North America.
The cello is the richest instrument of all string instruments, with more possibilities. My constant desire was to popularize cello. I wanted to prove that the cello was interesting enough for Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky to write for. Or for Stradivari to make. It's a noble, gorgeous instrument. But many simply never heard the cello. I decided it should be certainly deserving for everyone to know more about.
Piatigorsky's life was truly a remarkable journey, and of course the cello was his voice. He told me once that he thought he was the first cellist who ever played in Oklahoma. He was very proud of that. Through the cello, he expressed emotional truths, revealed despair, joy, sorrow, and beauty, framing them all as a mirror of life. And in so doing, he touched the hearts of everyone who heard him, really. Anyone in this room ever heard Piatigorsky play live? Wow, Maury, of course. 3 hands, terrific. We have to talk about that afterwards. Let's listen to Zubin Mehta describe his good friend, he was called Grisha, talking about his remarkable skill across all facets of music, and in particular, his impact upon new music.
There was no music that Grisha had not played, starting with the cafe house, the European cafe house, chamber music, orchestral music, cello transcriptions, contemporary music, the whole cello repertoire. I mean, he played more cello concertos than any other cellist.
Great artists of the 20th century revered Piatigorsky, not just audiences. Let's listen to what some of them had to say about him.
He was a great storyteller on the cello, and for me, that was really the essence of Gregor Piatigorsky. His ability to talk to you.
Sound with him was like conversation. The cello was just part of his body.
He never seemed to be actually playing the cello with his fingers and his hands. It was like he was playing it with his whole body and his heart. The cello was just a tool.
That sound I have never heard duplicated in any way. There was such warmth and excitement in his playing. And he had the ability to make anything that he took into his hands live.
When Grisha came out carrying this cello, which looked like a violin, because he was, 6'6", an enormous man, and played that instrument with that incredible joie de vivre, it was infectious to the audience. Everybody felt elevated, and everybody felt that we are in another sphere. We are not humans. It is music in the air, and music incorporated in this one human being who tells us that it's worthwhile living.
Yo-Yo Ma joins one of my classmates, Terry King, in marveling at Piatigorsky's ability to evoke tears of emotion and spark the imagination.
The sense of nuance that I hear in Piatigorsky, the special qualities of singing that come through in his playing, is what reaches me more than anyone else. He's the only cellist that could make me cry.
I think I first became aware of Piatigorsky from reading Cellist, his autobiography. I think I was probably pre-adolescent, and for a young boy to read about a person whom I admired so much from recordings, but to hear about his adventures was amazing. And to think that one could lead such a life playing the cello, and he became a superhuman figure, almost an action hero.
In the late 40s and 50s, Piatigorsky was regarded as the leading cellist of his day, the Yo-Yo Ma of his day. Casals had ceased performing, and the great Emanuel Feuermann had died. On one occasion, Casals and Piatigorsky played chamber music together, and Casals conducted Piatigorsky in an historic rendition of the Schumann Cello Concerto at the Casals Festival. Have a listen. Realize in this recording, Casals was over 85 and Piatigorsky was over 65. Two old guys making music at the highest level. It was remarkable. So what made Piatigorsky so remarkable, and how is it that he became this legendary figure? Perhaps it was the unique confluence of the characteristics which made up his persona. For example, his influence on the creation of new repertoire for the cello was unprecedented. The list of 20th century composers who wrote for him reads like a who's who of the era. Richard Strauss, Bohuslav Martinu, Sergei Prokofiev, Igor Stravinsky, Paul Hindemith, and William Walton. Over 100 works were written for or dedicated to him. I was very fortunate to have shared many memorable moments with him. One such moment was listening in on a conversation with William Walton during one of my lessons. Piatigorsky's 1957 live premiere recording of the Walton Cello Concerto, a work he commissioned, remains the definitive interpretation. In this excerpt from Murray Gregor's film called The Cellist, he interviewed me, and I discuss his tremendous talent for mimicking various composers. Many were his friends, and so there was a great irony when he characterized their style to perfection. That's the opening of Prokofiev, you would say, but actually Piatigorsky, a la Prokofiev. He had this amazing ability to impersonate composers, the greatest composers, and you'd swear you were listening to them, whether it was Bloch or whether it was Prokofiev or Stravinsky or particularly people of his time. I was working on the concerto that he had premiered by William Walton, the cello concerto. We were working on the last movement, and it ends softly after a large cadence and very bombastic moment. It then goes into a kind of introspective revisiting of the concerto. So we're working on this. You know what, he says, I never really liked this ending, you know? I think we should call Bill. Maybe he'd change something. Maybe he'd like to rewrite the end, you know? He says, come, pick up the other phone. He had 2 phones, so pick up the phone. He had dialed the number. He was on the Isle of Ischia, Walton, I think, somewhere, retired. And the phone rang, and his voice answered, hello? Oh, Bill, this is Grisha. How are you? He says, oh, Grisha. I'm well, thank you, and how are you? You know, very nice conversation. Well, I'm here with one of my students, you know. We're working on your wonderful concerto, you know. And we're at the end, you know, so beautiful, but, you know, would be so great if we could have big crescendo, you know, so that at the end, audience is on its feet, you know. Brava. This is how it ends. This long silence. And Walton finally says, you know what, Grisha? Let's just leave it alone. That was the end of the conversation. Despite his intense performance schedule and all the traveling he had to do as a soloist, Piatigorsky cherished his family. He was a devoted father and grandfather. When his grandson, Evan, started playing the cello at age 12, he was both thrilled and more than a little worried. Evan describes what took place.
Hello, my name is Evan Drachman. Gregor Piatigorsky was my grandfather. He had an enormous influence on me. As you can imagine, here I sit with the cello. I have spent my life playing the cello.
That's Piatigorsky's strat,
When I was
he has in his hand.
quite young, I think my grandfather and I formed a bond. Somehow we liked each other. He used to tell me stories. He would write letters to me. We lived on opposite sides of the United States, him in Los Angeles, me in Baltimore. And he would write me stories about, fantastic stories about the boy he knew who had wheels instead of feet, and the year that he spent flying through the jungles as he'd been turned into a bird. I just wanted to listen to him. He had a magnetic personality. And quite interestingly, he never spoke down to me like somebody would speak down to a child. He spoke to me like I was any other person, any other adult. So of course I didn't understand much of what he said, but I always just wanted to be there and I wanted to listen. When I decided to start the cello, my grandfather said that he would find an instrument for me. He tracked down the 7/8 size cello that Nick Rosen had played when he first started to study with my grandfather. And he bought that cello for me and he sent it to me. And he sent it to me with a letter. I happen to have that letter right here. And it it says, it was October 19th, 1975. And it says, "Dear Evan, I hope you will like this cello," with a big exclamation point. "I wish you happy life together. Kisses, Papa." That's what we used to call him, Papa. Well, I did get to play for Papa one time. I was pretty much a beginner, but I played for him. And he made me promise never to take the cello seriously. He told me that if I was successful, I would spend my life alone in a hotel and an airplane, and I would be miserable. He said, if you're not successful, you will be miserable that you're not miserable. I found out many years later that just after that conversation, he spoke with my grandmother and he told her that it was already too late. He said, he's tasted the blood of music. There's no turning back.
Piatigorsky believed that teaching music was unlike teaching anything else.
To teach music, it is not like to teach math or geography or any sciences because it's too wide. There's all the spiritual, emotional values, and actually in music you will find everything.
There were no rules. There were rules, etiquette rules, that dress code, that was important, that was unusual, but I accepted that, and so you wore a tie, even if you didn't wear a jacket, you wore a tie, and you came well dressed, which seemed to be, yeah, it kind of made sense. He was always well dressed for us, so why shouldn't we be for him? And let's face it, when you put on a clean shirt and a tie, you do tend to focus your playing better. So that was a good, gentle education. It was never enforced or people were not punished, but he would suggest quite gently if somebody didn't follow those rules, but maybe they were too economic with their clothing and so on. And that was a lovely way of doing it. And even then, so much was done in a kind of subtle and double meaning way that we only, all of us who were there and reflecting on that, we realized the wisdom of that way of suggestion rather than enforcement, which was very different from any other kind of teacher that I'd come across or is the norm, frankly.
That's Raphael Wallfisch, the great British cellist, who was a classmate and friend. For Piatigorsky, being an honest performer, a servant of music dedicated to faithfully revealing the composer's intentions, was paramount. Another classmate, Gottfried Hoogeveen, who was solo cellist of the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam, describes it this way.
Modesty is a fine thing, but not on stage. You know, that means already, or he would say, I did something in the Beethoven sonata, you know, I said, do something fancy, you know. I said, oh, I have to do something. And then he would say, hey, listen, Gottfried, Beethoven doesn't need makeup.
Piatigorsky performed with the most renowned musicians of his era. He enjoyed socializing tremendously, and especially with his colleagues. With them, chamber music became an essential part of his life and his career. His early chamber music partners read like a who's who of great and legendary performers. Misha Mishakov, Karl Flesch, Arthur Schnabel, Nathan Milstein, Vladimir Horowitz, and once in Los Angeles, the great Jascha Heifetz and Arthur Rubinstein. Together with Heifetz and Rubinstein, the Heifetz-Piatigorsky chamber music concerts were formed, and so was the so-called $1 Million Trio. These musical partnerships were for him among the most treasured of his career.
D minor trio of Mendelssohn.
I don't have to tell you who those people were. In fact, I had some amazing experiences playing chamber music with both Heifetz and Piatigorsky, occasions I will never, never forget. It kind of imprinted on my mind how it's possible for two great and kind of opposing characters to still unite in a musical presentation. Throughout his life, Piatigorsky adored great instruments and always managed to find the creme de la creme, the Stradivari's and the Montagnanas of the world, as the embodiment of his voice.
Piatigorsky played on 6 Stradivarius cellos during his long career and owned 4 of them. But of all the cellos, Piatigorsky's proudest possession was the Bata Stradivarius.
Stradivari, Bata. It is probably the most famous instrument in the world. And the cello is so wonderful that it is too good to people to play on.
Here's a remarkable photo I found of us together in Piatigorsky's garden. We were holding 3 of the greatest Stradivari cellos ever made. From left to right, there's the Bodio, which he enjoyed playing most of all, the Bata, which he mentioned, and the Duport. I guess this is about as close as I will ever get to Stradivari heaven. Nick Rosen was one of Piatigorsky's first and youngest students in Los Angeles. He went on to win first prize in the Naumburg competition and later gold medal at the Tchaikovsky competition. Nick describes what really made Piatigorsky great.
I always am trying to figure out what was great about this great man, because he was a great cellist, one of the great cellists of the century. That people know. But there was always something, there was an aura about him also. He was great because of his humanity. You know, not a perfect machine type person. He was a broad-based artist. And he never gave us fingerings and bowings. And I thought, well, wouldn't it save a lot of time if he gave us some shortcuts? But that wasn't his idea. He wanted us to learn how to do it for ourselves, because if somebody gives you all the bowings and fingerings, no matter how excellent these bowings and fingerings may be, you never learn how to make these decisions, which are so important to the musicality of what you're trying to express. It's a matter of making choices, and if you never make these choices, you don't know how to make choices, and you never be an independent artist then, you know?
Another student was Lawrence Lesser, the former president of the New England Conservatory and a wonderful cellist and teacher. He was Piatigorsky's assistant the year I auditioned for the class. You could say he was my pre-auditioner before playing for Piatigorsky. At the time, I was a student at Indiana University doing my undergraduate degree with Janos Starker, also a pretty great cellist. Sadly, Starker and I didn't get along very well. He tried to put me in a box that I was not willing to go into. And after a few years, I really couldn't take it anymore. And a close friend of mine, Rebecca Pennies, pianist who was on the faculty for many years at Eastman School, said, "Dennis, you have to get out of here. I know Larry Lesser in Los Angeles. He's Piatigorsky's assistant. I'll arrange for you to go play for him." She lived in LA, her parents did. And so it was arranged, and I went out to LA, stayed with her parents, and played for Larry. And he listened to me play. He said, "Okay, you can play for Piatigorsky, but I have to warn you something. He's going to ask you to do something totally unexpected. Be prepared." I said, "What?" He said, "You'll find out." And indeed, the next day I went to play for Piatigorsky, and it was all very cordial and nice. And suddenly he asked me, "Oh, Denis, why you not play scale in triplets?" That was a sign. Trick question. So I decided I would do a triplet fingering, which is different on the cello than what one normally does in a scale. And it turns out, as he told me later, that's why I got accepted into the class. Larry recalls his first meeting with Piatigorsky when he auditioned for him as a 12-year-old.
When I was a young teenager, I was studying in Los Angeles with Gregory Aller. That was Eleanor's father. And I was at the tender age of 13 or something like that. And I was bored with practicing. I wouldn't do it. My mother was a pianist and, you know, all of that stuff. I just wouldn't do it. Aller spoke to him and said, you know, I have this talented young man who's playing and he doesn't want to practice. And I thought that maybe if you would listen to him, maybe you could give some advice. And he, you know, he liked young people a lot. And I think also because he had been supported a lot as a young person, had a lot of success. And so he agreed. So my parents told me this had been happened, and I said, I won't go. So there was a lot of conversation with my parents, and then of course, mothers who cry get their way. So I said begrudgingly that I would go. So I came there to his house on the Bundy Drive, in that big living room, and came with a pianist who was not my mother to play, but my parents were both there. And I played, and when I finished playing, he turned to my parents and said, Larry doesn't look very happy. Why is that? My father said, well, he really didn't want to come here today. And he turned at me and he said, well, why is that, Larry? And so my father said, well, he felt that if he came here today, he would have to become a cellist. At that point, Piatigorsky looked at me and said, what makes you think you could become cellist? So
the level of cello playing in the class was unlike any that I have come across anywhere. Members included many names you will recognize, people of international renown like Misha Maisky, Raphael Wolfish, the late Stephen Cates, to name just a few. Piatigorsky promoted individuality rather than method or imitation in all his lessons. He believed in nurturing each person's unique voice, not in creating copies of himself. He described instrumental technique in an inspiring way. He said, technique is not a goal in itself. It affords you the ability to realize your musical ideas. Classmate Jennifer Langham describes it beautifully.
He was intimately interested in the lives of other people. He was interested in his students, his family, his friends, and he really cared about how people got on in life. He was not an ivory tower success story. He was down in the trenches with people, and particularly his own students, wanting them to succeed and wanting them to have meaningful lives as musicians and also as people. That, I think, meant the most to him.
I often reflect on how much meaning could be found in the poignant stories he managed to share with us. They were brilliantly tailored to meet individual needs and became lessons for all of us who were assisting in the class. And by the way, we never had private lessons. We met twice a week in a class from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. All of us sitting there. Sometimes you'd be sitting there for 3 or 4 hours, and suddenly he'd turn to you and say, oh, Denis, you know, how goes Dvorak? And you'd have to sit down and play it. Piatigorsky's charm and delivery was both infectious and irresistible. His abilities as a raconteur were unequaled, and he kept listeners spellbound. He always emphasized the importance of positivity, and particularly, and most importantly, of self-acceptance. On one occasion, I remember coming to him a little depressed. I'd been unsuccessful in a competition and had various other disappointments, and I was sort of crying in my soup, and talked to him about it. And he paused and he said, "You know what, Denis? You are like diamond. You keep diamond in your pocket. You don't sell today, you sell tomorrow. But always know you have diamond in your pocket." It was helpful. In class, Piatigorsky spoke about the destructive thoughts that many of us struggle with, all of us. Those demons of self-doubt and questions of self-worth that can be paralyzing, making it uncomfortable, if not impossible, to play with joy or comfort or abandon. Listen how he skillfully brought it all into the open as a shared experience.
You don't have to be genius to know your shortcomings, but you have to be a mighty intelligent person to know your strong points. That is your obligation, to know what's good, and if possible to enjoy it and convert everything that you don't like, to convert it to something that it is likable. That's the only way I know. Otherwise, you will live in the negative all your life. Since the early childhood, one says, now you're stupid, you don't know. And the parents are generally right, you see, you don't know. Then later on, when you start to reason, one would say, now look, unless you don't develop a really strong self-criticism, nothing ever comes out of you. So they continue. And then they have teachers and say, now look, I will play for you. There's especially the teacher who will like to play more than the students do. And that is bad, and this is bad, and that you have to learn. You don't know this, you don't know. So then it is, you see, that. You can't live on that, you can't prosper on that. And on top of it, you see, I never met a really, truly conceited musician. Because they know what they don't know. You see, so I met only people who act conceitedly and stupidly, but I never met a true conceit character, especially before the concert. Who says, now I will play, it will be a heaven, No.
Another classmate was Emanuel Gruber. He was an exceptional and sensitive Israeli cellist who became the solo cellist of the Israel Chamber Orchestra. Listen to how Piatigorsky speaks with warmth and disarmingly humorous tone, addressing his doubts while creating an encouraging atmosphere all around. In fact, he made us all feel like we were in it together. He stressed how important it was to first accept ourselves as we are and be comfortable with that. He encouraged us to accept our feelings and our doubts and try to make them normal, a part of life. In fact, lovely story, when I came to him confused about relationships of a personal sort, and he listened to my story, and there was a long pause, and he said, you know what, Denis? There are two kind of people on this earth. One kind pick you up, other kind pull you down. Stay close to first kind and far away from second kind, and you'll be okay.
I'm too slow in these passages, I don't know why.
Too slow?
Yeah.
So play faster. I mean, you feel you're too slow. right?
No,
Oh, it's not slavery. Play convincingly. See, nobody sits there with metronome and say, well, Emmanuel here is, they're not in the horse races or something. You see, there are no watches, Give the spirit of the thing that you can do it. First of all, first note. Supposing you introduce a new work and you will come and you say, it's not so good. That first note, I know, you see, it is difficult, very difficult. First of all, there's always strange accent. One start already. I heard it,
This is Shlomo. He's working on my bloch.
Do something out of it, No. Now, you see, she is very sympathetic, She knows Emmanuel doesn't like to dwell on this note forever, so she enters. And that is a signal. When she enters, you have no choice. You have to commit. But, supposing she's less nice, supposing I would be at the piano there, oh, I would let you hold that note until you cry, so that you go home and practice.
We were hearing before from Raphael Wolfish, who's been a cherished friend for half a century. And during the time we spent together in the 70s, we bonded as kindred spirits. Piatigorsky wanted all of us to act as advisors to each other, to learn from each other's strong points. His goal for us was that we become our own best teachers. He always emphasized the importance of speaking through the cello with an individual voice and an individual character. He stressed how important it was to be proud of our differences. This made us feel special, and we were special in his eyes.
The way he was approaching us all was totally as individuals, that we all had different backgrounds, different levels of potential, and he was not going to change that. He was not going to impose something. He was going to see how far that goes, and if we're able to develop ourselves.
Part of developing ourselves was instilling a rich sense of camaraderie among us all. He often asked us to play together in class, as you can see in this slide, with me and Nick Rosen. These occasions cemented lifelong friendships. Piatigorsky was also a tireless advocate for worthy causes in service of society. He stepped up on numerous occasions to support causes that he cared about. For example, on one occasion, he and Jascha Heifetz got together and donated their services to save the famous Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles, which was facing financial ruin. To this day, Piatigorsky's recordings are a treasure trove for all cellists and for all musicians and for all of us, the public. Some are historical references for all time. One such recording is the musical character he portrayed like no one else in Richard Strauss' Don Quixote, which he performed with Strauss.
Strauss loved Cervantes' Don Quixote and his own Don Quixote. It's a remarkable piece of music. It's one of the highlights, I would say, my musical activity, being in contact with Strauss and to play with him his Don Quixote. He even called me my lieber Don, my dear Don. I think Strauss has a special, tender place in his heart for the Don Quixote. To me, it was the easiest collaboration of perhaps of all the musicians I have played with.
Barry's giving me the sign that I have 2 minutes. If If you hadn't talked so long at the beginning, you see, I would have more time. We'll continue anyway, and I'll try and cut something out. Grandson Evan, who we heard from
his
previously,
sound, his
talks about it.
interpretations, his playing is something that is indelibly imprinted on my mind and my approach to the instrument. Even yesterday, I went back and watched a certain piece that I'm working on, the Schubert theme and variations, and I watched the video of him playing it and marveled at the ease with which he had and the dash that he played with and how he was able to capture his audience and bring them on a journey. There is something about a personality like Piatigorsky that is so present. It is almost 50 years since he died, and yet he feels fresh in my mind. I think about him on most days. I think about him when I pick up my instrument, when I practice, when I perform. He was a warm, generous human being and someone who gave tremendously to the world, to his students, to his family, to me, and I miss him very much.
I wouldn't like to be today 5 years younger or 20 years younger. It is nice, it is good to be what you are. I know I have a wonderful wife, I have children, I have grandchildren, and all the time, it's not one day passed that wouldn't happen something extraordinary. I simply can't recall a time when I was bored. I don't believe in boredom. I think it is kind of a dangerous thing. Too many people are bored to death, and they don't know what to do with it. Nobody really tell them how to be aware of that constant fascination. It doesn't have always to be tremendously joyful. I think that there are too many people who really behave as though there would be something better than life. But there is nothing better.
Piatigorsky taught us not just how to play the cello, but why to play the cello, which was to touch the heart and to move the soul. He believed that music's communicative power is transformative and overwhelming and positive, that it has the capability of immeasurably enhancing our lives in so many ways. He believed that great art is never just about the past, that it speaks to each generation anew. And that is why Piatigorsky's legacy remains relevant and alive to this day. We continue to learn from his wisdom and be inspired by his insights. He reminds us to never take life and living for granted. His profoundly positive message will continue to resonate with future generations. And his legacy is further endorsed through the existence of the Piatigorsky Foundation and the Piatigorsky Seminar in Los Angeles. I invite you to further explore Piatigorsky through the numerous documentaries and films about his life and, of course, the treasure trove of recordings. And especially, to never allow yourselves to become bored. An everlasting inspiration, a man in search of beauty and truth, he was a human being who reminded us of what it means to love life and live life to the fullest. In closing, let's listen to the sound of 100 cellos, singing his praises and uniting the cello fraternity he inspired.
4 string. It was made by a genius. And it is amazing how wide, all-encompassing thing that does not leave time for anything else. And so that is constant, never-ending striving for something that's almost unachievable. As a performer, you perform great music, but you can never perform it well enough. And the better you become at it, the music moves higher. So it becomes unreachable. You have to give all your life, only to discover that it's not enough. But you have to live thousands of years, maybe to know, and I don't know half of the possibility.